I bought 3 years of Greer Fairchild's life for £5 million. I paid off the compensation for her sister's car accident. I covered all her mother's medical expenses. I settled her father's gambling debts. The once proud goddess who despised money had to humble herself to please me time and time again. Until the day of her childhood sweetheart's birthday, when I caught her stealing my £300,000 men's watch. Greer Fairchild brazenly explained, "You have so many watches. What's wrong with taking one to give to Crispin? Didn't you say you'd spend any amount of money on me because you love me?" Contrary to my usual behavior, I didn't argue. Instead, I handed her a box of strawberry-flavored condoms. "Go find your childhood sweetheart openly. Stop racking your brains to deceive me. Have a wonderful night together." Greer was stunned for a moment, then burst out cursing. "Let me tell you, Wilfred Redgrave, your trick of playing hard to get won't work on me. I'd rather die than fall in love with you." Watching her walk away, I called my assistant. "We can proceed with my fake death plan." Ding. Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. Just yesterday, I suddenly discovered that I was the villainous male supporting character in a romance novel. I was the antagonist obstructing the love between the female lead Greer Fairchild and the male lead Crispin Ainsworth. In the end, I would be killed by their joint efforts, my assets seized, without even anyone to collect my corpse. Now that I've awakened to this reality, I'll take care of that corpse myself first. Greer Fairchild returned the following afternoon. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes filled with a seductive gleam, and her gait was noticeably unnatural. Even a fool could guess what she had been up to the night before. In the past, I might have confronted her out of pain and jealousy. But now, knowing everything, I simply glanced up at her before returning to my work. Greer, however, seemed unsatisfied with my reaction and approached me deliberately. She snatched the laptop from my knees and tossed it aside. Thankfully, the thick carpet in the living room, laid to keep her feet warm, prevented any damage. "Do you need something?" I asked calmly, looking up at her without emotion. Greer narrowed her eyes, studying me for a moment before speaking coldly. "Wilfred Redgrave, don't think I don't know what game you're playing. You think acting like this will make me pay attention to you? It absolutely won't. If it weren't for you, Crispin and I would be together already. You despicable capitalist. Don't think you can control my life." Greer's eyes were filled with anger and hatred towards me, even though I knew I had never truly been in her heart. Hearing such words still caused a sharp pain in my chest. We had been together for 3 years. But my love for her had lasted far longer than that. 6 years ago, I fell in love at first sight with Greer when she hosted the opening ceremony. From that moment, I was determined to pursue her. I spent money on her, bought her gifts, took her to dinner. But Greer scorned it all. She once threw away a bracelet worth tens of thousands of pounds that I had given her, cursing me viciously. She said love couldn't be measured by money, and she would never love me. Because the one she loved had always been her childhood friend, Crispin Ainsworth. But I believed that persistence would eventually win her heart. To pursue her, I even lowered myself to curry favor with her childhood friend. Still, Greer despised me. She said I was insulting her dignity with my money. Later, I finally decided to give up. But then I learned that Greer's mother had fallen ill. Not only that, but her sister had been involved in a hit and run, and her father had accrued massive gambling debts. To give myself one last chance, I offered her £500,000 to be with me for 3 years. If I couldn't win her heart in that time, I would let her go. However, in those 3 years, I spent far more than $500,000 on her, only to receive her daily contempt in return. But just 2 days ago, I had a strange dream. In it, I learned the truth about this world. It turned out that I was nothing more than a villainous supporting character, the main obstacle preventing the heroine Greer from being with the hero Crispin. I would ultimately die by their hands, with no one to claim my body, and even the fortune my father had built would end up in their pockets. Love, in the face of life and death, was ultimately insignificant. I admit I retreated. If she had a destined hero, then I would step aside for them. Wilfred Redgrave, are you listening to me? Greer's voice snapped me back to reality. What? I responded instinctively. A flash of disgust crossed her eyes, but she repeated her demand. I said, Crispin has been evicted because he couldn't pay rent. You should let him live with us. I was about to refuse immediately. This was my family's house. Why should I let a stranger move in? But I swallowed my words. If I wanted to change my fate, I just needed the hero and heroine to be together. Then I wouldn't lose everything. All right, I said. I knew you would refuse, Wilfred. You have no idea how hard it is for Crispin to live on his own. Someone like you, born with a silver spoon in your mouth. What did you say? Greer's eyes widened, not expecting my agreement. I said, all right, I suppose you do have some humanity after all, she muttered, turning to go upstairs. Though I had asked her to be my girlfriend for 3 years, I was no monster taking advantage of her misfortune. In those 3 years, I had never forced her to do anything against her will. But in Greer's eyes, I was still a bastard. I picked up my laptop with a bitter smile. A message from my assistant made me pause. Mr. Redgrave, everything is arranged. In 10 days, you'll be able to fake your death and escape. 10 days. Actually, this fake death plan was just a spur-of-the-moment idea. In the novel, I ended up being killed by the main characters. I was worried that the plot might develop in the same way this time. If that's the case, why not just fake my death to prevent any future troubles? At least I wouldn't have to worry about being affected by the plot. I spent the entire afternoon dealing with company matters. After faking my death, I wouldn't be able to appear in public as my original self. I needed to arrange the company's affairs first before I could leave with peace of mind. This process took me until evening. It wasn't until Greer Fairchild's voice woke me from my work state. Wilfred, take me to Crispin's place to pick him up. Greer's voice carried a commanding tone. Over the past 3 years, I had hardly refused any of her requests. Suddenly, I remembered that dream. The people in the dream called me a lapdog after I died, which seemed quite fitting. I inwardly gave a bitter laugh and said without looking up, I still have work to deal with. You can go by yourself. I didn't think there was anything ambiguous about what I said. But Greer inexplicably flew into a rage. Wilfred Redgrave, stop looking down on people. You think I'm eager to ride in your car? I'm just worried that Crispin has too many things for us to carry alone. Don't think you're so great just because you have a bit of money. Let me tell you, I will absolutely never like someone like you. After saying these words, Greer ran out. I stood there dumbfounded, feeling utterly perplexed. But thinking carefully, it wasn't the first time she had gotten angry with me over such things. I remember on her birthday in the first year, I threw her a birthday party and invited many people. My intention was to pave the way for her future career, to give her more choices. But Greer somehow got very angry with me for some reason. She even publicly embarrassed me. She said I did it deliberately to humiliate her. That was the first time I had put thought into something for a girl. I frantically tried to comfort her, but what I got was a slap from Greer. Thinking about it now, most of my good intentions seemed to be seen as attempts to humiliate her in Greer's eyes. Yet when Crispin simply bought her a bracelet from a street stall, she would be happy for days. I didn't understand Greer's thinking, but in the next second I received a message from her. Why can't I contact the driver at home? Wilfred, are you deliberately not letting me go pick up Crispin? Mr. Zhao took the day off today. I told you about it. Stop pretending. I know you're doing this on purpose, deliberately not wanting me to see Crispin. I will absolutely not give in. When I tried to send another message, I found that Greer had already blocked me. This kind of thing had happened countless times over the 3 years. Each time, it was only after I begged for forgiveness that Greer would reluctantly unblock me. But perhaps because I now knew the true nature of this world. For the first time, I felt a headache from Greer's behavior. Not long after, my Alipay showed a deduction of £56 from the family account. An odd amount. I knew without guessing that it was Greer's taxi fare. Shortly after dinner, Greer brought Crispin back. Crispin was carrying bags of stuff which he placed at the entrance. Looking at his several pairs of unwashed trainers, the stains on the shoes gave me a headache. I have mild OCD, and the house has always been spotless. But oddly enough, Crispin walked right into my house wearing shoes that had clearly been through some mud puddle. "Mr. Redgrave, thank you for letting me stay temporarily." Behind him was a trail of footprints. The carpet that the housekeeper had just changed today was completely ruined. I felt my breath catch, and instinctively said, "Change your shoes before coming in." Crispin froze, saying bitterly, "Mr. Redgrave, I know you have a big house and business. These shoes are my most expensive pair. If you don't like me staying here, if you look down on me for being poor, I can find somewhere else to stay." I frowned and was about to explain when Greer had already pulled Crispin behind her. "Wilfred Redgrave, what do you mean? I knew you weren't so kind-hearted. You agreed to let Crispin stay just to insult him, right? Let me tell you, Crispin is different from you. He may not have money, but he has a pure and passionate heart. I don't know why Greer always misunderstands me, but I've explained too many times, so I didn't want to speak up." She pulled Crispin upstairs directly. I thought the worst outcome would just be Crispin moving into my house. But I never expected that night I would hear moans coming from the next room. "Crispin, be gentle. Stop it, you're always teasing me. Don't." Greer's voice was softer and more coquettish than I'd ever heard before. Her breathless sighs kept filtering through the wall into my ears. I stared at the dark ceiling, feeling as if my heart was being squeezed in someone's fist. I knew they were destined to be together. I knew Greer had never cared for me. I knew they had probably done this thousands of times before, but hearing it with my own ears still felt agonizing. That night, none of the 3 people in the manor slept well, but my body clock still woke me at 7 a.m. As I sat eating breakfast at the dining table, Greer came downstairs wearing only an oversized shirt. It was clearly Crispin's. She didn't even try to hide it. Even the love bites on her neck were openly exposed. Greer didn't speak, but made a lot of noise with her movements, until I could no longer bear it and set down my coffee cup. "Do you need something?" Greer finally stopped. She stood in front of me and sneered. "What's your game, Wilfred Redgrave? You just want me to beg you, so you can trample on my dignity, don't you? What can you do besides using money to control me? Don't think you can trap me forever." I had no idea what had gotten into Greer so early in the morning, until the butler quietly said, "Mr. Redgrave, today is the day for Miss Fairchild's mother's medical fees." Only then did I realize. I never forgot this day, but perhaps I had overlooked it due to recent events. "Don't worry. I'll go pay the hospital fees for your mother." Hearing my words, Greer showed no gratitude. She just glared at me hatefully and said hoarsely, "Don't think this will make me love you. Wilfred Redgrave, I will never let you defeat me." I watched her angry figure storm off, but all I could think of were the intimate marks on her neck. What kind of man who threatens a woman could be as pathetic as me? I even pretend not to notice when she cheats in my own home. The screen of my phone lit up beside me. I looked at the date and counted down silently. 9 more days. In 9 days, it would be Greer's birthday and the end of our 3-year agreement. After that, Greer could be with Crispin, and I should no longer be in danger. I went to work at the company as usual. At lunchtime, my secretary hesitantly entered my office. "What is it?" "Mr. Redgrave, Miss Fairchild spent quite a lot on your supplementary card today." The secretary handed me the statement. All the items on the bill were men's products. It was obvious who they were for. I had given Greer this supplementary card 3 years ago. When she received it, she berated me. I thought she would never use it. But the very next day, she bought Crispin a new pair of trainers. She said Crispin wasn't like me. I had everything growing up, but Crispin only had her. I loved her too much. Even though I knew she was entangled with Crispin, I didn't dare get angry, because I was afraid she would leave me without a second thought. So I deceived myself, thinking it was enough as long as she was willing to come back. Is there a problem? It wasn't the first time Greer had bought things for Crispin, so I didn't understand why my secretary seemed so anxious. until she directed my attention to the last item on the statement. It was the only women's item among everything. A set of black lace lingerie and a sexy maid costume. I almost unconsciously folded the bill in my hand. Men always have desires that need to be relieved. A year ago, I was caught by her while thinking about Greer Fairchild. That day, she called me shameless, disgusting, and disrespectful. I frantically tried to appease her, but she locked me out of the room. For a long time after that, Greer Fairchild ignored me. Since then, I never dared to do such things again. But it turns out, she doesn't think Crispin Ainsworth is disgusting. It turns out, what she couldn't accept wasn't the act itself. It was me. I gave a bitter laugh and tossed the bill into the rubbish bin. I understand. From now on, don't tell me anything related to Greer Fairchild. Understood, Mr. Redgrave. As she left, my secretary gave me a worried look. It's all right. I only have 9 more days before I leave. These days won't last much longer. On the 8th day of the countdown, I went to see my parents. Ever since I insisted on keeping Greer Fairchild by my side, my parents rarely kept in touch with me. I know it's because they were disappointed in me. Looking at their faces, no longer vibrant due to the passage of time, I thought of their fate in my dream. In the dream, Greer Fairchild and Crispin Ainsworth used underhanded means to kill my parents, causing them to die in agony. I realized then what an unfilial son I had been. I told my parents about my plan to fake my death. They didn't know why I was doing this, but when they heard I was no longer fixated on Greer Fairchild, they agreed to play along. Wilfred, it's wonderful that you've come to your senses, my father said, patting my shoulder, his tone full of relief. On the 7th day of the countdown, I worked late into the night before returning home, only to find the living room in disarray. Men's and women's clothes were strewn about, and I even spotted Greer Fairchild's underwear on the sofa. A glass had fallen to the floor, now in pieces. Hurried footsteps came from upstairs as a disheveled Greer Fairchild ran down. Seeing me, she frowned and demanded, "Why didn't you let me know you were coming home?" "This is my house," I stated matter-of-factly, but Greer Fairchild's eyes welled up with tears. "Wilfred Redgrave, you don't need to humiliate me like this. You're the one who made me stay here. I didn't want to stay willingly. I'll pay back everything I owe you, and then we'll have nothing to do with each other. The 3 years are almost up. I can finally leave you for good." Greer Fairchild had said such things countless times over the years, but for all her talk, she had never once gone to work. I felt I had been good enough to her. Hearing Greer Fairchild speak like this, I no longer felt any pain in my heart. Perhaps this is what they call getting used to it. I looked at the broken glass on the floor and said softly, "That glass cost over £2,000. Who are you trying to fool? A cheap glass for over £2,000. You're just trying to embarrass me on purpose, aren't you?" Greer Fairchild's shrill voice echoed through the empty living room. I wasn't lying to her. The glass was an art piece I had bought while traveling in France. "Is it just about money, Wilfred Redgrave? Is money all you have? It's just a glass that costs £2,000. I'll pay you back." Greer Fairchild pulled out her phone and transferred the money right away. Then she ran back upstairs without looking back. I opened my own payment app. Looking at the family account transfer record, I couldn't help but laugh. Paying me back with my own money? That's a first even for me. The 3rd day of the countdown. For some reason, the gift I sent to my client had been opened. The diamond brooch inside had vanished. As I pondered this, Greer Fairchild came down the stairs. She was holding on to Crispin Ainsworth's arm and let out a cold snort as she passed me. "Wait!" I called out to stop her. Greer frowned as she halted, saying coldly, "What is it?" "Wilfred Redgrave, you said yourself that I could openly date Crispin." Greer emphasized the words, "openly date," but my gaze fell on the glittering brooch. "The brooch. Give it back to me." Hearing my words, Greer's eyes widened in disbelief. I couldn't blame her for being so surprised. The brooch was clearly a women's style, and for the past 3 years, All the feminine items that had appeared in my home were gifts I had given to her. What did you say? That brooch isn't for you. It's a gift for my client. Mr. Redgrave, I know you're angry, but there's no need to be so hard on Greer, is there? Crispin's eyes were full of disdain as he looked at me. He seemed convinced that I was lying out of jealousy. Crispin, don't waste words on him, Greer said. Wilfred Redgrave, do you think I care about your things? If it weren't for the fact that you'd use every means to give them to me if I didn't accept, I wouldn't want them at all. It's just a brooch, Greer said, but made no move to take it off. I could only repeat myself. The brooch. Give it back to me. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. In the past, what I feared most was seeing Greer look so pitiful and wronged. One tear from her would make me want to pluck the moon from the sky for her. But the things I gave her, she never liked. Fine, take it. Greer yanked off the brooch and threw it to the ground. Wilfred Redgrave, I'll never accept any gift from you again. She stormed off after saying this. But what Greer didn't know was that I would never give her any gifts again. The day of departure had finally arrived. From early morning, Greer had dressed up to the nines. We hadn't spoken a word since the brooch incident. I knew she was waiting for her birthday party. For each of Greer's birthdays, I would throw a lavish celebration and give her the most precious gift. The first year, I gave her a £1 million jewel. The second year, I gave her fireworks across the city and a one-of-a-kind sports car. This year, I had planned to give her a diamond-encrusted wedding dress. I had thought whether she chose to stay or leave, I wanted her to know that I would always be her strongest support. But now it seemed pointless. I left the house as usual, ignoring Greer's gaze. It wasn't until the end of the workday that Greer finally couldn't bear it anymore. She called me, her tone full of urgency. Wilfred Redgrave, today is the last day of our agreement. I know, I said as I got into the car, which my secretary had prepared for my staged death. Today is my birthday. I know. Greer's voice had become shrill, but I remained calm. Wilfred Redgrave, are you deliberately trying to humiliate me? I've already told my friends you'd celebrate my birthday. Now you're playing hard to get. You. Whatever Greer said next, I couldn't hear. Because at that moment, a massive explosion erupted in my ears. It's been over 2 weeks since I left. Yet the news about the death of Redgrave Group's CEO in an explosion is still buzzing all over the internet. Father has returned to the company, and Mother has been seen weeping openly in public. They even held a convincing funeral for me. After everything settled, Mother called me to tell me about Greer Fairchild's fate. She and Father kicked Greer out of the mansion and took back everything I had given her. As she was being thrown out, Greer shouted that she had been forced to stay with me. She claimed I had trapped her with money, that she never liked me. Now that she was leaving, it was exactly what she wanted, and she would never submit to capitalism. Mother recounted this to me in vivid detail, not forgetting to sneer at the end. Humph. I couldn't see any sign of her being forced at all. When we kicked her out, her eyes were practically glued to that sports car. Only you were foolish enough to believe a girl like that. I was left speechless by Mother's scolding, only managing an awkward laugh before hanging up. During these 2 weeks away, I've come to realize that perhaps Greer was never the person I thought she was. I believed she was strong and pure, undefeated by life. But I forgot that a truly strong and pure girl would never do such things. She certainly wouldn't repeatedly reject my advances verbally, only to end up accepting all my gifts. After hanging up with Mother, there was a knock on my door. Audrey Falconer stood there holding a pot, smiling at me. Wilfred, quick, come on, I've made dinner. Let's eat together. Audrey was the first friend I made after coming abroad. The day we met, my phone was snatched by a thief. Before I could even react, Audrey, who was passing by, had already dashed off after them. In just a few minutes, she returned with my phone. While I was still figuring out how to thank her, she had already waved it off as no big deal. Phone snatching happens often around here, you'll get used to it. You can do like me and keep your phone attached to your wrist. Then it won't get stolen. Audrey's smile was radiant, and it lifted my previously gloomy mood. Later, we discovered that we were not only neighbors, but also from the same city back home. Finding a fellow countryman in a foreign land was a rare treat. So Audrey and I became fast friends. When she learned I couldn't cook, she often invited me over to her place for meals. Audrey was an excellent cook, and in just half a month she had managed to fatten me up quite a bit. When I asked if she had studied to be a chef, she just waved it off nonchalantly. Who needs to study that? If you do it enough times, you'll naturally get good at it. Audrey told me that her mother had left when she was very young, and her father was an alcoholic, so she had to take on the responsibility of caring for herself. But despite being born into such a family, Audrey never thought of giving up on herself. She studied hard, wanting to change her fate. In the end, she won a full scholarship to study abroad at university. Even now, Audrey was making her way through life, working part-time while studying. After hearing her story, I was silent for a moment, then asked a very foolish question. I asked if she hated rich people. This was clearly the influence Greer had left on me. But Audrey just stared blankly for a second, then burst out laughing. Wilfred, are you mad? They have their money. I have my life. What's it got to do with me? Besides, rich people's money doesn't fall from the sky. They have to earn it too. There are plenty of rich kids at our university, and they study hard as well. They don't look down on me, so why should I hate them? I still remember Audrey's bright smile that night. It dispersed the dark clouds that had been hanging over my heart for so long. That night, after dinner at Audrey's place, I was washing dishes in the kitchen when I heard her say from behind me, "Next month, you'll have to fend for yourself." I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. What? I'm graduating next month. I'll be going back home. Wilfred, I can tell you're from a wealthy family. If I ever end up working for you in the future, remember to take good care of me. Okay? Audrey patted me on the shoulder, her smile still as bright as ever. But as I looked at her, for some reason, a hint of sadness welled up in my heart. She was leaving. Ever since Audrey Falconer told me she was returning to England, I've been contemplating the possibility of going back myself. According to my mother, Greer Fairchild and Crispin Ainsworth are already living together. Moreover, the company hasn't encountered any problems. Does this mean that the plot has diverged completely from my dream? Does it prove that I've changed my original fate? If so, would my return to England really affect anything? I struggled with this decision for a long time, but finally made up my mind when I saw Audrey packing her bags. I want to go back. I can't hide abroad forever. However, returning to England requires careful planning. When the explosion occurred, the police didn't find any bodies inside. So even though I was declared dead publicly, my official records weren't actually erased. I could simply claim I was kidnapped by enemies to resolve the situation. But the biggest problem still lies with Greer Fairchild and Crispin Ainsworth. To be honest, I don't want to have any connection with Greer anymore. I don't want the events from my dream to come true, so staying away from her is the best choice. But what if Greer finds out I'm alive and comes looking for me? Although I know the chances are slim, I can't risk it. It wasn't until my mother told me about Greer and Crispin's marriage that I finally felt relieved. Now there's nothing to worry about. Mom, I want to return to England next month. My mother immediately informed my father about this. They began preparing for my return. On the 60th day after my fake death, 10 days after Audrey left, I returned to England. As soon as I got off the plane, I was surrounded by reporters. Mr. Redgrave, was the previous explosion you're doing alone? Why did you go to such lengths to deceive the public and leave? Is it true, as your father claims, that it was to mislead your enemies? Is there more to this story? I didn't answer any of the reporters' questions, instead quickly getting into the car. Sometimes silence is the best answer, because people will always find the answers they want. The public opinion fermented online for quite some time. But as I looked at Audrey's contact information on my phone, I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. If she knew I had deceived her, would she be angry with me? Would she never speak to me again? Mr. Redgrave, here's the list of newly hired employees for your review. The The secretary's voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up and immediately spotted Audrey Falconer's name on the list. Is she a new employee too? Yes. The secretary looked confused but nodded nonetheless. Ask her to come see me. I could barely control my tone. While waiting, I couldn't stop adjusting my tie. I somewhat regretted not listening to my mother's advice to groom myself properly before leaving. Soon after, there was a knock on the office door. Audrey poked her head in, wearing that familiar smile. Mr. Redgrave, you wanted to see me? Audrey Falconer sat across from me, looking composed. I, on the other hand, appeared somewhat uneasy. Mr. Redgrave, if you continue to fidget like that, I might start thinking I'm the boss here. Audrey teased, which made me relax a bit. At least she hadn't turned and walked away. So, you already know about my identity? I asked. With all the fuss online, it would be hard not to, she replied. Though I had guessed you weren't ordinary, I never imagined you were actually the CEO of Redgrave Group. Tell me, what was that whole fake death business about? Audrey's eyes gleamed with curiosity. I rubbed my nose, feeling rather embarrassed. After all, what happened because of Greer Fairchild's actions was quite humiliating. Well, I began, but before I could find the right words, my secretary burst in. He looked furious and flustered. Mr. Redgrave, Greer Fairchild is causing a scene downstairs. She's insisting she's your girlfriend and demanding to see you. I hadn't expected Greer to actually show up here. Hearing her name again, I immediately furrowed my brow. Girlfriend? Mr. Redgrave, you seem to be keeping quite a few secrets from me, Audrey said, her tone clearly displeased. I quickly explained, she's not my girlfriend. She's married. It's a complicated situation. You can come down with me, and I'll explain everything once this is sorted out. Audrey raised an eyebrow, non-committal. When we took the lift down, we could hear Greer shouting at the receptionist. I've told you, I'm Wilfred Redgrave's girlfriend. Why won't you believe me? I'm warning you, Wilfred Redgrave will fire you when he gets here. He loves me to death. I'm certain it wasn't my imagination. Audrey definitely glanced at me when Greer claimed I loved her to death. A chill ran down my spine. I cleared my throat and stepped forward. Mr. Redgrave, you're here. This lady, she. Wilfred, you're finally back. I forgive you, Greer exclaimed. Who? Who's forgiving me? Greer Fairchild lunged directly at me. Fortunately, the secretary was quick enough to stop her. Though her body was restrained, her mouth wasn't. Listening to Greer's words, I asked in confusion, What are you forgiving me for? For abandoning me without a word, of course, she exclaimed. I've thought it through these past 2 months. I didn't see it clearly before, but I've actually been in love with you for a long time. I can forgive you for deceiving me, she continued. My mom's medical bill is due in 2 days. As long as you pay it, I can be with you. Greer spoke with such righteousness that I felt momentarily dazed. If I hadn't come to my senses, I might have almost been fooled by her. Greer, I think you're mistaken. Our relationship ended 2 months ago, I stated firmly. Back then, I used £500,000 to treat your mother, pay off your father's debts, and clean up your sister's mess. You yourself said you'd only be with me for 3 years. Those 3 years have passed, and I've realized that forced relationships don't work. Greer's eyes widened, seemingly unable to believe that I would refuse her. Wilfred, what are you saying? She cried. Do you think you can just discard me now that you've had me? Let me tell you, I'm not some plaything for rich people like you. Exasperated by her antics, I had no choice but to be blunt. Greer, I never treated you as a plaything. You've been the one exploiting my feelings for you to benefit yourself, I said firmly. For 3 years, you've lived off me, yet you're still unsatisfied. You claim I'm humiliating you with money, but you use my supplementary card every day to buy clothes and gifts for your childhood sweetheart. You even use my money to buy condoms for your trysts. In the end, your childhood sweetheart moved into my house, becoming another parasite. Now that I've let go and allowed you to be with your sweetheart, what more do you want? Greer, I don't love you anymore. Is that so hard to understand? It was the first time Greer had been so publicly humiliated. The whispers and stares from onlookers made her face turn crimson. Biting her lip, with tears welling in her eyes, she trembled as she spoke. How could you do this to me, Wilfred? I knew it. I knew you never truly cared for me. You just wanted me to fall in love with you, so you could trample on my feelings. You rich people are all the same. Greer acted as if I had wronged her terribly. As I was about to speak, Audrey, who had been silent until now, suddenly interjected. Miss, I think I understand now. You spend someone else's money to satisfy your desires, then accuse them of humiliating you with money. Why not just refuse it if that's how you feel? Your attitude of wanting to have it both ways makes you no different from a thief. What do you know? He chose to give it to me. How is that my fault? Greer finally revealed her true thoughts. The crowd around us murmured in disapproval. Realizing she had embarrassed herself, Greer hurriedly muttered, You'll regret this, before running away. I breathed a sigh of relief, only to turn and meet Audrey's mocking gaze. No wonder you didn't want to tell me. It really is quite embarrassing, she remarked. I had thought that after Greer's hasty retreat that day, she wouldn't show her face to me again. But to my surprise, just 2 weeks later, she intercepted me once more. Wilfred Redgrave, I'm begging you, please save my mum, she pleaded. She's run out of money for treatment. Please give me some money. I'm begging you. After not seeing her for a while, Greer Fairchild looked much more haggard. I heard from my mother that her married life with Crispin Ainsworth was far from happy. Crispin would lie around at home all day, not bothering to go to work, dreaming of becoming a big boss. Their arguments grew more and more frequent, and they had become notorious among their neighbors. Seeing that I remained silent, Greer made as if to kneel down. Wilfred, I know what I did before was wrong, but my mum didn't do anything wrong. You can't just stand by and watch her die. Tears slid down Greer's face. The panic and sorrow on her face didn't seem fake. I sighed and said in a deep voice, Greer, is there any point in continuing this charade? Her sobbing paused for a moment. I don't know what you're talking about. Greer's eyes darted around as she bit her lip. Greer's mother had actually been quite nice to me. After learning that I had paid for her medical bills, she had thanked me multiple times. Although I didn't like Greer, I had no intention of causing someone's death. So, during my time abroad, I had instructed my secretary to keep an eye on Greer's mother's situation. But her mother had passed away in the first month after I left the country. The reason was that after Greer was kicked out by my parents, she had taken her mother out of the hospital, pocketed the remaining medical fees, and bought many luxury items for herself and Crispin. Her mother, however, had died in her bed at home. Greer, she was your own mother. So what? If she hadn't married a gambler, how could my life have been so miserable? It's all her fault. She even got this illness to burden me. If it weren't for them, if I had been born into a rich family, I would definitely have lived better than anyone else. Wilfred Redgrave, what are you so smug about? You just happened to be born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Seeing that I had exposed her lies, Greer no longer bothered to keep up the act. This was the first time she had shown her true face to me. Her distorted expression, shrill voice, and the hatred in her eyes all made her seem like a stranger to me. Before I could speak, a familiar figure rushed over from not far away. It was Crispin. He kicked Greer in the back and immediately started berating her. You bloody tart. I wondered where the hell you'd gone. And here you are trying to seduce your ex-boyfriend? What? Feeling hard done by with me, are you? Want to go back to living in a mansion, do you? It's no use. He doesn't want you anymore. You stupid cow. Who do you think you are? Crispin kept kicking her, his mouth full of obscenities. Greer, clearly not unfamiliar with such treatment, covered her head with her hands and lay on the ground, crying out in a practiced manner. I watched their twisted behavior for a moment, then turned and left without another word. Later, My relationship with Audrey Falconer progressed steadily, and we were accidentally caught by my parents. I thought they wouldn't like Audrey, just as they hadn't liked Greer Fairchild before. But to my surprise, my parents quickly accepted Audrey, even treating her more like their own child than me. Confused, I once asked my mother in private. She told me that their dislike for Greer wasn't because of her background, but because of her character. Before your father's business success, we were just an ordinary family. We don't have prejudices about social class, she said. We were only prejudiced against Greer as a person. There are many unfortunate people in this world. Some resign themselves to their fate, while others use their own strength to change their lives, she continued. And Audrey is the latter. As it turned out, my parents' judgment was correct. Audrey left her job at my company after a short time. She partnered with some former schoolmates to start her own business. Though not large in scale, it was developing steadily. Audrey told me she didn't want to be my accessory. She wanted to be herself, just Audrey Falconer. 3 years later, Audrey and I got married. On our wedding day, security guards removed a madwoman outside. She was wearing a wedding dress, muttering that she was Mrs. Redgrave, my wife. I ignored it, just instructing the guards to continue patrolling and not let any suspicious people in. Fortunately, the wedding went smoothly. When I held Audrey's hand, I finally dared to believe that I was no longer the villainous supporting character. Wilfred Redgrave was now the protagonist of his own life story.